Good Saturday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 3rd. Today we are concluding our read through Zechariah, the minor prophet Zechariah, and we are also reading in John chapter 18. So Zechariah 14 and John 18 are up for today. As always, let me go ahead and get the text up on the screen for us so we can read along together, concluding here in the text of Zechariah chapter 14. We have the final of the images that is given to us concerning the Messianic kingdom. What we are going to see today is again, in the context of everything that I've seen so far in this final section, in 12, 13, and 14, I continue to see Messianic language associated with it. And I think that continues on today, that we continue to see Messianic language. We'll note that as we roll through. And I think that it just shows us how once God's kingdom through the Messiah does come about, then yeah, there are going to continue to be people who are going to stand against it and who are going to try to persecute it, who are going to try to overcome it. But here the Lord stands, continuing to overcome those who are against his people and those who try to stand against his Messiah. And in the end, we're going to see that everything in Jerusalem, or again, I believe we're recognizing here the church, the heavenly Jerusalem, in a sense, the spiritual Jerusalem, we're going to see everything be taken care of by our great God. So reading together here in Zechariah chapter 14 and verse number 1. Zechariah chapter 14, verse number 1. Look, a day belonging to the Lord is coming, when the plunder taken from you will be divided in your presence. I will gather all the nations together, or all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. The city will be captured, the houses looted, the women raped, half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. Then the Lord will go out to fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives will be split in half from east to west, forming a huge valley, so that half the mountain will move to the north and half to the south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for the valley of the mountains will extend to Azal. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come and all the holy ones with him. On that day there will be no light, the sunlight and the moonlight will diminish. It will be a unique day known only to the Lord, without day or night, but there will be light at evening. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it toward the eastern sea, and the other half toward the western sea, in summer and winter alike. On that day, the Lord will become the king over the whole earth, the Lord alone, and his name alone. All the land from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, will be changed into a plain, but Jerusalem will be raised up and will remain on its site, from the Benjamin gate to the place of the first gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the royal wine presses. People will live there, and never again will there be a curse or complete destruction. So Jerusalem will dwell in security, very similar to what we saw in the past couple of chapters, dwelling in security, that idea. Verse 12, this will be the plague with which the Lord strikes all the people who have warred against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet. Their eyes will rot in their sockets. Their tongues will rot in their mouths. On that day, a great panic from the Lord will be among them, so that each will seize the hand of another, and the hand of the one will rise against the other. Judah will also fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be collected. Gold and silver and the clothing in great abundance. The same plague as the previous one will strike the horses, mules, camels, donkeys, and all the animals that are in those camps. Then all the survivors from the nations that came against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of armies, and to celebrate the festival of the shelters. Should any of the families of the earth not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of armies, rain will not fall on them. And if the people of Egypt will not go up and enter, the rain will not fall on them. This will be the plague the Lord inflicts on the nations who do not go up to celebrate the festival of shelters. This will be the punishment of Egypt, and all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the festival of shelters. On that day, the words holy to the Lord will be on the bells of the horses. The pots of the house of the Lord will be like the sprinkling basins before the altar. Every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord of armies. All who sacrifice will come and use the pots to cook in. And on that day, there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord of armies. Zechariah chapter 14 and the conclusion of Zechariah's writings. And again, I think it's important to remember a couple of things. Number one, the fact that this is written at a time whenever the people are needing motivation to continue to rebuild, to continue to restore what had been destroyed based upon the sin of the previous generations with Jerusalem and with the temple and such. Therefore, they need a motivation to do all these things. And what better motivation than to know that there is coming a day whenever the Lord will perfectly restore everything, whenever he will perfectly provide for his people, that even if they might come under attack again in the future, that the Lord himself will step up and defend them. That seems to me to be the way to understand this, that the Lord is going to raise up Israel again. And the question then always is, well, is that spiritual Israel? Is it physical Israel? And my stance has been that we're talking about spiritual Israel here. I think there is abundant evidence to recognize that the church, those who belong to Christ, are recognized as spiritual Israel, and that the Lord is going to defend spiritual Israel, which is also spiritual Jerusalem. And he's going to provide within spiritual Israel and spiritual Jerusalem all the provisions that are needed. Even when the world might be against his people, the Lord is going to step up and provide for them, even to the extent of it being described here that every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to the Lord. And it's also important to remember as well the fact that what we're dealing with here is apocalyptic type language, and apocalyptic language often is not literal in its meaning. It is given to give an idea of what type of thing is going to happen without that thing being actually what takes place. For example, I'm not sure if what we see with this is literal rotting of flesh while they stand on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, their tongues will rot in their mouths. I don't know if that's, I'm not convinced that is a literal thing that's going to happen, but it is representative of the fact that no one can stand against God's kingdom that has been brought about through his Messiah. And that's the comfort that we get from the last few chapters of Zechariah, is that the Lord and his people, they will prevail. Although they might be attacked, though they might be oppressed in many ways, they will prevail. And we can be very thankful to God for that reality. So that's what we see in the minor prophet Zechariah. A tough read. Let me tell you, those last few chapters pretty tough. But I think they'll prepare us pretty well for whenever we get ready to read through Revelation here in a little bit, a couple weeks, I think. No, maybe about a couple weeks from now, we'll be reading through Revelation. I think this type of language here will help us in that. And it, just as a small aside, if you want to read a book that can help you in reading through Revelation, I really recommend Mark Roberts' book, Understanding Apocalyptic Literature. If you go to Amazon and type in Mark Roberts Apocalyptic Literature, it should pop up there. It's just a good book to help prepare the mind to read a type of literature that we are just not very familiar with, that can help us to understand it a bit better. So look forward to that here in a few weeks, reading through the Revelation once we get through John's writings. Speaking of John's writings, we are in John chapter 18 today. John chapter 18, I should note as well that we're going to begin reading through Malachi tomorrow. We'll be in Malachi chapter 1 tomorrow. But as far as John goes, we're in John 18, and it is now time for Jesus to be betrayed. The last, let's see, 15, 16, 17, the last, 14, I think it's 14, 15, 16, 17. The last four chapters have been focused on Jesus's time that he has spent with his disciples, going back to chapter 13, where Jesus washes their feet. So the last five chapters have been focused on his interactions with his closest disciples, the apostles, as he is preparing them for what is about to come with his betrayal and crucifixion. And now we're finally going to see that here in chapter 18, as John records it. We're going to see Jesus being betrayed and see what takes place between him and the Jewish leadership, and even the leadership of the Romans. So John chapter 18, verse number 1 After Jesus had said these things, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas took a company of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees and came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. When Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, or Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, went out and said to them, "Who is that you're seeking? Or who is it that you're seeking?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." "I am he," Jesus told them. Judas, who betrayed him, was also standing with them. And when Jesus told them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Who is it that you're seeking?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. "I told you, I am he," Jesus replied. "So if you're looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the words he said, "I have not lost one of those you have given me." And we saw that just recently within the past couple of chapters. Then here comes Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his ear. And John gives us the detail that this servant's name was Malchus. At that, Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the company of soldiers and the commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus and tied him up. First, they led him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die for the people. Simon Peter was following Jesus, as was another disciple. That disciple was an acquaintance of the high priest. So he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter remained standing outside by the door. So the other disciple, the one known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the girl who was the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, "You aren't one of the man's disciples too, are you?" "I am not," he said. Now the servants and the officials had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. They were standing there warming themselves, and Peter was standing with them warming himself. Verse 19, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus answered him. "I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where all the Jews congregate, and I haven't spoken anything in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said." When he said these things, one of the officials standing by slapped Jesus, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" "If I've spoken wrongly," Jesus answered them, "give evidence about the wrong. But if rightly, why do you hit me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said to him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" Which is kind of funny that that's what he mentions. He didn't mention, "Hey, aren't you the one who cut off, cousin Malchus's ear?" But verse 27 says that Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed, fulfilling Jesus's words from earlier. When they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning, and they did not enter the headquarters themselves. Otherwise, they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover because he's a Gentile. So Pilate came out to them and said, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you." Pilate told them, "You take him and judge him according to your law. It's not legal for us to put anyone to death," the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what type of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own, or have others told you about me?" "Well, I'm not a Jew, am I?" Pilate replied. "Your own nation and the chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. You are a king then, Pilate asked. You say that I'm a king, Jesus replied. I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. What is truth? Pilate said. After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no grounds for charging him. You have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They shouted back, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a revolutionary or a insurrectionist. He was a murderer. And that concludes chapter 19. You know, one of the things I want to point out here is what Jesus says within this text. My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. As it is, kingdom, or my kingdom is not from here. Here's the thing, though. Didn't Peter try to do that? Didn't Peter try to fight for Jesus whenever he was being arrested? That indicates to me that Peter still didn't get it. Peter still was not properly understanding exactly what it was that Jesus was seeking to accomplish while he was here on the earth. And we might say, well, how dare Peter not understand? I mean, he had Jesus right there in his midst. And yeah, I want to look at it from another direction. That tells me that, hey, if Peter had trouble understanding, maybe we should, I don't want to say lower expectations for the understanding of other people, but maybe we should seek to be patient with the understanding of other people. Be patient with them, because sometimes it takes time to really grow in knowledge and understanding and application of God's word. And that's the thing. As far as I can tell, God never demands of us perfect understanding or perfect knowledge or even perfect application. No, he really desires for us to try and to really be honest in our growth. Now, perfect application might not happen in us if we don't want it to happen, because we don't want this thing to be a reality. That's one thing. But if we just haven't gotten it yet, if we're working towards that, we're starting to grow towards that knowledge, which leads to the application, then that's good. That's what we should be striving to do. And we see that even with the apostles, don't we? We see them after everything happens with Jesus and his resurrection. There are still some things that they weren't understanding. Even in Acts 1, they didn't get it. They said, all right, so now all this happened. Is it time to restore Israel now in Acts chapter 1? And Jesus says, you still don't get it. But soon you're going to have the Holy Spirit, and he's going to lead you into all truth. And then what they do is what we have previously seen, that they, as Jesus prayed, would write to us things that we now strive to understand, that we now strive to grow in our knowledge of, and then to allow that knowledge to lead to proper application and proper living out faith in our lives. So I encourage us all, just be patient. Be patient with people who might not be where we are yet in their knowledge and in their faith. Struggle with them, work with them, be patient with them, help them to grow as best we can, and don't just write them off. Let's be patient with our brothers and sisters, because even the apostle of Jesus, he didn't even get it at one point. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading. Hope that you have a great rest of your Saturday. Is the first real football Saturday of the fall, of course. So we are many of us are getting to enjoy college football being back again, and that certainly is a great thing. But most wonderful is the fact that tomorrow is Sunday, and we're looking forward to being with everybody tomorrow for our Bible classes and our worship assembly. It looks to be a great day in Loudon. I'm excited for our Bible classes. I'm excited to talk tomorrow from the Old Testament book of Esther. Talk about Esther and how she gives us a great example of an overcomer in her own right. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. God bless you. And we'll see you tomorrow as we read again together from Malachi chapter 1 and John chapter 19, I believe it is. John 19. We'll be reading from Malachi 1 and John 19 tomorrow. Take care. God bless.